You are at the inaugural event of our new series called 7 Billion, Conversations That Matter. And I'm so pleased that all of you have decided to join us today. Many of you in this room are the leading thinkers in the areas of economic development, population, reproductive health, security, the environment. And so I would be very happy to have you here and hope that you'll join us in our next set of activities around this new community we're trying to build around this question of 7 billion. As most of you know, at Aspen, we believe the conversations that matter have a few key characteristics. One is that they're interdisciplinary. Secondly, that they challenge us, and they challenge the status quo. And thirdly, that they really call on us to think about the world in a different way. So I promise you that each of these conversations in the 7 Billion series will surprise you and will be out of the ordinary and will not be boring. So the way this event is going to flow is we are delighted to have Hans Rosling speaking with us as our keynote, and then he will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we have a distinguished panel with Undersecretary Maria Otero and with Kavita Ramdas, who will offer a response to Hans's presentation, and then we will have plenty of time for questions and answers. So I'd like you to be thinking about what are some of the key things you want to talk about today. Without any further ado, let me introduce an extraordinary person who, if you have not had the great delight of watching one of Hans Rosling's presentations, let me tell you, you're in for a wonderful surprise. Hans is sort of the master of shock and awe, and he's sort of the master of the aha moment. And I need to say that from the first time I saw him give a presentation, I saw the world in a whole different way. And so we're just really honored, Hans, that you've decided to come and be with us this afternoon. We've rearranged the room about 4 times before we got it right. We've moved tables, and we may rearrange it again. But in any case, we hope we have created a space that will allow Hans to do his magic. Hans Rosling has conducted research for 20 years on global health and the link between economy and health in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, beginning with his discovery of a previously unrecognized paralytic disease named Konzo while working as a young doctor in Mozambique. He has served as an advisor to WHO and UNICEF, co-founded Médecins Sans Frontières in Sweden, and started new courses and published a textbook on global health. He's a member of the International Group of Swedish Academy of Science and the Global Agenda Network of the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. And as director and co-founder of Gapminder Foundation, Mr. Rosling promotes a fact-based world by converting international statistics into interactive and understandable graphics to explain global trends concerning past and contemporary economic, social, and environmental changes. Let's give a round of applause for Dr. Rosling.
Thank you. This is the graph that stunned the world. Relatively simple. Every bubble is a country. The size of the bubble is the size of the population. The big bubble there is China. This one is India. The color corresponds to the continent. So the sort of yellowish here is the Americas, United States, and Canada here. And on this axis is the size of family, or actually, to be more precise, the fertility rate. 1 children per woman, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And on this axis is the length of life, in life expectancy, 30 years, 50 years, 70 years. And in 1950, you can see clearly 2 clusters of countries. One group up here, the industrialized world, the developed world, the West, whatever you would like to call it, that had small families and long life. And the big rainbow group of countries down here, which had large families and short life. That was not always so. If I would go backwards in the world, it looked like this 150 years earlier. Everyone was down here. Not a single country had more than 40 years life expectancy. It was miserable. Depending on the repression on reproductive, we had 4 or 5 children per woman. All countries were growing. Then we had the diverging world, the rise of the West, the enormous effect of the Industrial Revolution, a more efficient way of working, and the world starting to diverge, with some countries getting healthier, getting smaller families, The bubbles that jump up and down, they are the ones who have good statistics. Just look at Sweden, you know. I have to brag a little here. You can see. If you think that the course of development was even in Sweden, you should look at this, you know. It's like it's sort of difficult. You know. This is where my family's members mostly got fed up and moved to the United States, you know, because there were so many famines, you know. But that was Sweden. If we look for the rest of the world, what happens was this. Life got longer indeed, and the world started to separate into these two clusters. And at 1950, we were at the maximum separation point. And we had the dichotomized world that became a tattoo in our brains and our mindsets, that there is indeed a West and a rest, and very few in-betweens. Look at these two in-betweens 1950. Who were they? That was Cuba, and this was Hong Kong. The trading station for the Spanish Empire, the trading station for the British Empire. And he would like to see if Cuba have done well compared to Hong Kong, because they were on par 1950. So then, after 1950, what did happen? Well, that's what has failed. The educational system here has failed to tell students what has happened. And we decided to do animation. What we have done with these graphics is that we have liberated the x-axis. It used to be occupied by time for the last 200 years. And you could only look at one indicator at a time. And if you were in business, you got narrow-minded. If you were in public health, you got narrow-minded, because you put your favorite indicator on this axis, and then you had time here. Now I can have different indicators here. And let me show you what has happened in the world. We'll make it a little slow down here. What do you imagine? It was almost 3 billion people here. And when it ends, it will be almost 7 billion people. And have these countries got healthier and moved up here? Have they got more planned families and less children and moved to here? This indicator is one of the best known indicators. Family size is very easy to measure. You have a census, you knock the door swings open, kids come out to see what it is, and you count them 1, 2, 3, 4. Very simple, very simple. You can send freshman students to do it, you know. This is more difficult. So we have solid data this way, and look when the world is moving, what is happening. You can see after independence, that was the leap by Mao Zedong with famine, but afterward China decided to go for family planning, and they moved over here like this. You can see the Arab countries, the green one, they get a long life, and now they also start with family planning. And look at Bangladesh catching up with India there. What fantastic thing. And this is unfortunately the HIV epidemic going down, and the rest of the world ends up here. This was unknown. When I showed this the first time in US, Al Gore came up and shook my shoulders and said, I didn't know that. I didn't have the slightest idea. And that's the number cruncher of the politicians. Then you can imagine the rest of it. That means that the world is not data-driven. And that's been a shock for me as a professor of public health, that my services is on highest demand in the corporate sector, because the companies of the world want to adapt. And they ask much more for trying to understand the market. What is happening in Asia? I say, I don't understand. What should we invest in Africa also? How fast should things change? You know, and it's really up here. Almost the entire world has small child families. Is this a theoretical indicator? No, it's the bedroom. And you have a beautiful expression here in the United States. You talk about pillow talk. If there is pillow talk between the young couple, that they decide to have 2 children, which should have a tennis racket, which should have a football, which should have a guitar, and the family should be able to go to the beach, you have pillow talk, and there's modern families. The world is full of modern families, but the world also consists of these situations. And down here you have Afghanistan. Afghanistan is there, and the neighboring country to Afghanistan is Iran. It's up there. Iran today has fewer children per woman than Sweden. The fertility rate in Iran today is lower than Sweden. Afghanistan is there, and they are neighboring countries. So it tells you that you cannot only you have to know them all. And I have this neighbor that keeps impressing on my wife by knowing 200 types of wine. And I only know 2 types of wine, red and white. Whereas I know 200 countries and my neighbor only knows 2 types of countries, industrialized and developing. The problem in the Western world is that there's too many wine knowers and too few world knowers. And even we tend to, so look, I mean, it's the one which impressed most of Al Gore was when I did this. I took Vietnam here, and I took the United States up there. I took away the rest. And these data are good for both of these countries. And this was when the hostilities started, and this is the situation today. It's a beautiful catch-up, isn't it? Yeah. Vietnam bedroom, US bedroom, same. What is this axis? This axis is bathroom and kitchen. You have water, you have soap, you have food on the kitchen table, you live like this. Vietnam is 1 generation behind. Vietnam today have a longer life expectancy than United States had when Senator McCain came home from prison in Hanoi. What's the difference then? The difference is the living room, the garden, and the garage. That's defined by the money. I don't have money here. This is human capability. So I will introduce money by taking children per woman away, and instead I will put income per person here. And we will see the difference between Vietnam. Oh, it's a big gap. 1964, US was here. Today, Vietnam is here. How far back do I have to get US to have the same purchasing power per capita as Vietnam have today? They were on par, the 2 countries in the bedroom, 1 generation difference in bathroom and kitchen. Now we're in living room and garage. I have to take the United States back to the Civil War. This is why it's so difficult to understand the world today, because the human capacity on Vietnam is just 1 generation behind, while it's the economic capacity. The economic capacity here, the human capacity this way, is almost the same. The economic capacity is 4 or 5 generations behind. The advance of technology, knowledge, and political leadership can make the sequence of events change dramatically, and democratization, well, it's very Western because it's Karl Marx, and I consider Karl Marx Western, so the Communist Party of Vietnam must be a Western influence, you know. Whereas democracy is not in sight in Vietnam. But they still have an economic growth so fast, so it's very embarrassing that the best custodians of the market economy are the Communist parties of Vietnam and China today. It's embarrassing for the left, it's embarrassing for the right. But it seems as most of the Chinese and the Vietnamese can live with it. But it is indeed violations of human rights. It is indeed violations of human rights, but it's very successful progress of the countries at the same time. It's a challenge to grasp those 2 things. Now, this is what we have seen. The whole world, if we do like this, and we take the trails away. By the way, this program is freely available from Gapminder's webpage on the web, or you can download it, install this in Adobe Air on your desktop. It's a continuous world. If you would like to find, I gave you this graph, if you would like to find the difference between the developed and the developing countries, you will probably think it's there, isn't it? I have money this way, I have length of life that way. I have Congo, Afghanistan, I have Japan, US, and Qatar. Al Jazeera is here. You see why Al Jazeera is so independent. If you draw the line there, you find the Czech Republic on one side of the line and the Slovak Republic on the other side of the line. That shows you how futile it is to try to make 2 types of countries in the world today. It's gone. The West is over. It's a concept in the mind, but it doesn't exist in the reality, neither on the economic. It's a continuous world, and Tom Friedman nicely called it the flat world. It's not really flat, you know. As journalists should, he exaggerated. But he catch what is really happening, that you have from the, India is here, but the better parts of India, you have an entire emerging economies here in the middle, which correspond where the West was just 2 generations ago. Then you have the low-income countries here and the collapsing countries down here in civil war. We have to have a new concept of the world to understand it. And the problem is when we try to look at this into demography, we find it like this. Where I prepared this? Here I show children per woman again on this axis, and now child mortality here, focusing on the death rates in the first part of life. 300 children dying, 200, 100 dying per 1,000, 10%, 20%, 30%. 1960, 2 clusters, developed world here, low child mortality, few children per woman, developing world here. Here's even more impressive that what has happened. What has happened is this. You can see it. It's a tremendous different situation. Almost the entire world is down here, but still Afghanistan is there and Congo is there. Now, even here you have 6 children per woman, you have 2 out of 10 that dies. This means that the population of Pakistan and Congo is doubling in 25 years. These wars we have now are not enough to stop population growth by death. If you want to stop population growth by death, you need holocausts. Only twice during my lifetime have population growth in a poor country been stopped by death. It was during Pol Pot in Cambodia and the terrible genocide in Rwanda. Yet, most of the public in the Western world think that child mortality keeps control on population growth. It's gone. It's over. We invented soap and we took away smallpox. It's gone. Death is useless for control of population. The only thing that controls population is the bedroom. The young couple having pillow talk and deciding to grasp for the condom, to grasp for the pill and say, we'll have 2 kids. And of course, education is important for that. Education is important for that. Look here, 1990, on this axis, mean years in school for women 25 to 30 years. Young women, mean years in school. 1 year in school, 10 years in school, 15 years in school. And down here, mean years in school for men. What the correlation. What the correlation. The big difference is not gender difference, it's whether you are rich or whether you are poor. But there is a gender difference. Some countries a terrible one. Look at Yemen. The men are 4 years in school, the women half a year in school. 8 times more schooling invested in men than women. That's not good for takeoff. That airplane doesn't take off. So there is indeed a gender difference, but it dwindles away compared to the economic differences. And here in the middle, you got to Vietnam, Philippines. You have 8.7 years for men and 8.9 years for women. It's gone, the gender differences. And when we move the world forward, you can see that somewhere there in the middle, the gender difference in education disappear. But I warn you to think that you have gender equity because of this. Because schooling is just a way of measure gender differences. They are much more subtle and much more brutal than this. And it's so dangerous to take schooling as an example because Iran has achieved complete gender equity in training. But gender issues are a severe problem in Iran still today. So here we see the difference in schooling today goes from Afghanistan down here and Burkina Faso. And the major problem in Afghanistan is not only that women has only been 0.6 years to school, but that men has only been 3 years into school. They are very easy recruits for whatever armed group these men. And we really have to have another thinking of the poorest countries than we have today. Stop thinking about developing countries. There are 6 out of 7 billions. To save developing countries means that you put Mayflower, you put Washington, Lincoln, and Eisenhower into the same chapter of US history. It's intellectually at very low level. And you just compare the past with the present. We have to look at these different levels and what the policy options are there. And what will now happen in the future? What will happen in the future? Look here at the big race here. Because one of the best things with getting down mortality, getting up education, enabling couples to control family size, both by being educated and healthy and being able to grasp for the condom and the pill. Or, they don't need both at the same time. Is that it fosters economic growth, or it facilitates economic growth. You get less investments for children. You can bring them more years of school per child. And if I look at economic growth from 1800 to 1900 to 2000 and into 2050 and 2100 over there, and this is the race where we start with United Kingdom at the lead. United States wanted to catch up, and down here the miserable countries of Japan, Sweden and China being on par, and India being dominated and pushed down there at the bottom. What has happened during these years in economic growth? Now I am conventional, I have time back on this axis, I have money per person here, $400, $4,000, $40,000, indeed logarithmic axis to see more clearly. Because economy should be displayed on economic axis because we measure it as growth in percent. So let's go here and move forward. What happened? Britain would rule the world forever, but America is catching up. Can you see? We take away the others, so we'll see more clearly. It's quite exciting here, 1850, you know. Sweden is just barely in front of Japan. This is why this 1849 is when most of my folks gave up and moved to Minnesota. And you can see the reason. It's very simple. Why live here when you can live there? It made a lot of sense, you know. Because they couldn't get into England, you know. They were too nasty there. And here Sweden takes off, Japan follows, but India and China, look, they are down there. They are not moving. And now United States is overtaking there, you know, burning a lot of fossil fuel that paid for it. And here Japan is trying to get up, China and India is down there. And here we go into the Second World War, Japan falls down, but now the fantastic catch-up of the Toyota, which makes it all the way to the Volvo there. And this is what we've seen in the last year. Can you see the giants coming? I have the IMF projections, here we go. China, can you see this? The little shift there? That's Lehman Brothers doorstep. It's nothing. It's nothing in the long run. The important thing for the United States is not these hiccups, you know. This is what we all honor United States for. It is the enormous investment in the Second World War and the victory for democracy. And we will be eternally grateful for it, you know. But that's the past now. This is the 1930s. We were never grateful for it and we will never be. Neither will we be for Lehman Brothers here, you know. But there's no impact here. China grows now internally. And they can go on, and India is just following here, you know. So I have a projection method, that's why the stick is so good, you know. You can do like this, and you see, it used to grow like this, then it used to grow like this, now it seems to grow like this. So the meeting with China will be here, it will be 2048 in the summer, the later part of the summer, the month, more precisely the 27th of July 2048. It's my 100th birthday. So instead of trying to make an uncertainty range, I make a ridiculous precision. It may happen in my lifetime. What I saw happening with Japan and West Europe, I may be able to live to see with China and India and West Europe and North America, and we ain't prepared for that. We ain't prepared mentally for that, you know. And we just said in school that this won't happen, you know. It was impossible to be 1 billion people in India, and it's today in India is more successful than ever, and have all its problem of inequity, and lack of gender equity and all these things, you know. And China has the lack of democracy, but it's enormous what is happening in the world. And I can put countries here, South Korea. You see, Sweden is the Japan of Europe. A dreadful cold pine forest up in the north that was beyond all civilizations for a very long time, and then eventually made it by independence and wise balance of government and market. We did it here, others do it, and they will all do it. The problem and the challenge for me is that the projection is that we will still have Congo down there. And in 2050, Congo is projected to be one of the 10 biggest populations in the world. It's already among the 20 most populous countries in the world. That's where we are. We have an enormous challenge to handle the merging of the emerging markets and the former West, and we have to handle the catch-up here. And I brought my little Legos here to show you this finally in physics. I've taken some minutes too much. But this was the world when I grew up. Can you see? The West, 1 billion, the blue, were here, and the developing world was over here. 2 billions. And Tintin used to go with Captain Haddock to have adventures there, and then he went back. And Indiana Jones did there, you know, and did great things and came back. And Spielberg is still obsessed with that. Not to mention this terrible Avatar film. Where they go and paint people blue over here and distort their eyes, you know, and think that's something you can use in real life. What has happened in this? I leave this, which was the past. Since I was in school, 4 billion has been added. West got richer. The 2 billion here is still as poor. This landed here, and China catched up, and India catched up. They came here, and the proof is that this year they acquired the Volvo company. America couldn't run it. China is now running it successful. This is the world today. What we are talking, the 7 billion worlds is just a step. The 9 billion, when we can flatten off, will look like this. We will have 2 billion more. They will end up here, but this will sure catch up. And now we have the environmental constraints, and see how we handle this. This will go here, and this has to go out of poverty. And is the West ready to be just the foundation of the modern world? And just 1/3 of the foundation of the modern world, and not remain the engine as we have identified ourselves to be? This is more important. Or will we have a war between the United States and China? Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hans. That's just fantastic. So we're just going to take a couple moments to bring some chairs up and have our guests join us. Thank you so much, Hans. That was terrific. So for the next part of the program, it's really my great honor and happiness to invite two women to join Hans and myself on the stage to discuss some of their reactions to his presentation. And the two people who are coming to join us are actually two women that are heroes of mine and have for most of their lives been working to make a difference and have done extraordinary things. And the first person is Undersecretary Maria Otero. She's Undersecretary of State. She oversees and coordinates U.S. foreign relations on a variety of global issues, including democracy, human rights and labor, environment, oceans, health and science, population, refugees and migration, and monitoring and combating trafficking in persons. I think she's just recently told me they've given her another portfolio as well, which is to frame the whole thing in terms of the new QDDR, and so work diplomacy into all of those issue areas as well. Maria Otero is formerly president and CEO of Accion International and the economist for Latin America for the Women in Development Office of USAID. She also served for 5 years at Center for Development and Population Activity, CEDPA. In 2006, Ms. Otero was appointed to the UN Advisors Group on Inclusive Financial Sectors. She sits on the board of the U.S. Institute for Peace and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Among her many other accomplishments, I'm proud to say that Maria and I went to the same graduate school. We went to Johns Hopkins SAIS, which is right down the road. And something that you may not know about Maria is not only is she an extraordinary leader, but she always leads also with her heart and with a lot of fun and joy, which is why I knew that she would be a good partner for Hans. She is a terrific dancer. I need to tell you that at SAIS, at many of the SAIS events, Maria and I have been leading the dance floor charge. And I also want to say that, you know, the trajectory of Maria's life is quite extraordinary. A long time ago, before when Accion was just getting started, I remember visiting Maria in the attic of her house in Adams Morgan, where she was just beginning Accion's work on beginning to think about the research around financial inclusion in some of the poorest countries of the world. And she went on to do so many great things. So Maria, we're just delighted in your busy schedule. She's just gotten back from a couple of different countries, and she's agreed to come here with us today. So thank you, Maria. And then secondly, we have Kavita Ramdas. Kavita Ramdas is also an extraordinary person. She's a dear friend. She served as president and CEO of the Global Fund for Women from 1996 to 2010. She's currently serves as a senior advisor to Global Fund for Women, and she's a visiting scholar and fellow at Stanford University Center for Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law, and the Center for Philanthropy and Civil Society. She also chairs the expert advisory group of the Global Leaders Council for Reproductive Health, which she and Hans and I have been discussing for the last hour this morning. She previously was with the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, leading programs in economic development, reproductive health, and population. She serves on the Board of Trustees of Princeton University and Mount Holyoke College, and is a member of the Global Development Programs Advisory Panel at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Among her many accomplishments is Kavita's voice for women all over the world, and certainly under her tenure at the Global Fund for Women, she grew the fund to play an enormous role in a number of leading issues. And I just want to say something you may also not know about Kavita. Her voice is one of passion and justice, but she's a fantastic singer. And so I was honored to be able to be with her in a leadership group. So you may not know that you're only hearing the policy side of these folks' brains, but they equally match Hans's creativity in their full personas. So I'd like
to. There will be a performance a little bit after.
There will be a performance after, right.
Including Hans.
The next roundtable series is that. So let me join these folks up on the stage. We will have about 10 minutes of response from each Maria and Kavita, and then I'll ask a few questions and we open it up to the group. Love to have you give us your most provocative and creative questions as well. Thanks. So Maria, can we begin with your response to Hans's
thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, and it really is, it's not just an honor to be here, but it's also a real honor to be part of the Global Leaders Council, because it's just doing such important work. You can imagine how bold the challenge is to respond to this presentation when I'm representing a government and I come with my written messages that have to be read one word after the other. So it will be somewhat of a challenge. I was looking for myself in the 1950 range. I was born in Bolivia, one of the poorest countries in Latin America. I didn't see too much Latin America in here. In fact, my friends from Brazil are already calling, I can tell you, because they'd like to see themselves right up there with India and China. But you know, clearly these numbers are incredibly compelling, and they turn inside out the way in which we've been thinking about the world. I've always been a proponent of that. When I worked in microfinance, we took banking and we turned it inside out to be able to really make a difference and to arrive at good responses. So this, I think, is clearly one way to help propel us to action in a much more specific and in a much more tailored way as we look at the way in which the world is evolving. Let me just say a couple of things. First, I have to say something about the Obama administration. And just the overall concern with these issues that prevail in the administration. I mean, all of you know that the efforts to just get resources, reproductive health resources especially to women, is one of the leading components of what the Obama administration is doing. The Global Health Initiative centers on women and on reaching them. And there has been, speaking to your issue, there has been a real effort made to identify the countries specifically in which one would work the most in order to be able to address these questions. So that kind of issue becomes very important. And then responding to the issue about women, there is no question that the correlation between education and fertility is the one that we see. And you had your wonderful little ruler to be able to show that correlation. But broader than that, the issue of putting women as the cornerstone and being able to address many of the issues that are of concern to us is really a no-brainer. I mean, there's just no way countries will evolve unless one is working with women and reaching women with resources and with the ability to be empowered in the work that they are doing. The Secretary Clinton says this all the time, you know, take care of the women and you will really help move the countries forward. We know well here, and I think that's why this presentation is so compelling, that discussions about population and debate about population has been mired in debates that have really pulled populations, groupings apart, and have not allowed us to arrive at this level of understanding of this or this kind of analysis. And we expect that that's going to continue in this country, and it will continue even worse. So being able to expand this narrative and to include issues that use the many different sort of factors that are used in this presentation becomes enormously important. One of the things that I would do to enhance the presentation that you made would be to just add a couple of additional points that emerge from the work that I've been doing. And you can tell me to stop whenever you need to. But for example, one of the issues that I've been working on a lot is the issue of water, the availability of water as we fast forward several decades, not just access to water for people who don't have it or access to sanitation, the bathrooms and the soap and that you spoke about, but also the degree to which water can become a national security issue, because its scarcity can become a source of conflict. And how incredibly related this issue of natural resources is to these factors that we are seeing here. Pakistan is one of the countries that I've been working with, and there's the people in Pakistan that are enormously interested and concerned and working on addressing water issues, developing policies, making it more efficient, making it more productive. And as you're working with them and you're engaged in helping them do this, they said, well, but also, by the way, by 2030, Pakistan will have another 52 million people that will enter the population. And there you throw up your hands and you say, we're not quite sure what is to happen with all that. So I give this as an example of the relationship between what we have seen and just the natural resources that are available to us and how they are being impacted. One other issue that is, I think, very important is the issue that relates to security in relation to this, because one could use these graphs also to look at refugee populations, migration of people as conflict arises and as they move from the countries, either because of famine or some other natural disaster or because of conflict. There are probably 35 million people around the world that are displaced and that are roaming from country to country or are internally displaced in their countries. They are among the most vulnerable populations in the world, and they are exposed to all kinds of different threats, and women in particular are very threatened, whether even in refugee camps, but especially as they are trying to find their way. I was in Kenya last week and I visited the Hashima Safe Center, and I spoke to young women who had been separated from their families as they were migrating from Somalia into Kenya, and I spoke to a young woman who was 13 who was holding her 4-month-old baby in her hand. And this was from rape. And every young woman that was sitting in the room with me were women who had been raped, who had been abused, and who themselves were now contributing to the population issues that we're seeing. So addressing this, bringing the intersection between some of the things that we've seen and security issues and the truly vulnerable populations is an element that I think is important to incorporate. And finally, I would say that one of the other issues that is enormously important as we look into this, and that I am also working on a lot, and you've brought it up, is the issue of youth. It doesn't matter what country we go to, but I have here listing, and I can't show it to you in a way that is as compelling. But between now and 2050, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Congo, Bangladesh, Uganda, United States, Ethiopia, and China will, among all of them, represent about half, they will represent half of the world's projected population increase. And of them, we will see that the large majority will be youth. In Kenya, again, 39 million people. The calculations are that 75% of them are under the age of 30. So looking at this demographic shift and this demographic issue is very important because it means you need to begin thinking about youth not as a problem but as a true opportunity and a true contributor to addressing some of those bedroom questions where you're making decisions not only about how many children you have, but also about how your country should be run and about how you should be becoming one of the advocates for a better future. So looking at how we handle youth in the context of what we've heard today is enormously important. Remember that they are all texting and they are all tweeting all the way down to the bottom of the pyramid, and there are enormous ways to be able to reach them and to integrate them into the kind of work that we're concerned about and the kind of work that we're doing. So I will stop there, but certainly we could continue and add to these issues a great deal more.
Thank you, Maria. Perfect. Excellent. Wonderful. The Obama administration is so lucky to have you, and I think that this linkage of the issues.
They don't give me enough chances to dance.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, I understand you were
What good
dancing
is the
with
revolution if you can't dance?
some of Michelle and her children. I think up in Kenya, you were dancing. Good. I'd love to turn it over to Kavita. Kavita, from your perspective, really representing so many different grassroots women's groups, your response to Hans's presentation and your thoughts.
Well, thank you, first of all, Peggy and the Aspen Institute for inviting me. It is a wonderful privilege to be here in front with all of you and with Maria, who's also a longtime friend. We go back a long time. And Hans, who I first met at the Women Deliver conference about 4 years ago now in London, where he did a similar presentation. It was the first time, and I, sat just, I mean, if you can fall in love instantly, I had an immediate, instantaneous. Good, I'm glad you have your scarf on. That's, we want men to learn how to be more modest. They have a ways to go. So, I'm really delighted. As I did then, I think, again, it's interesting, our different experiences and where we come from and what our assumptions are because of where we come from. Maria mentioned that she was born in Bolivia. I was born and raised primarily in India, but moved around a lot. My father was in the Navy and spent 2 years in Burma as a child, a year in England, 3 years in Germany. And I think so much of sort of my assumptions about both growth, development, the role of women, the differences and similarities between what was and what was not possible as a result of industrialization. Some of you may know that TED Women is going on right now in DC, and yesterday Hans gave a wonderful presentation in which he began with the story. A washing machine came out on the stage, much to everybody's confusion, and he began a story about how he remembered as a young boy the arrival of the first washing machine in his home and what that meant for the transformation of how his mother spent her time and what it enabled her to be able to actually do. At the very end of the presentation, a hand comes out of the washing machine and it starts handing Hans books that his mother was able to read to him. And I told him this morning when I saw him here that what it immediately brought to my mind was a trip I made to Burkina Faso in 1999, about 3 years after I had begun my work at the Global Fund for Women. A small group of village women in a village about 3 hours drive outside of Ouagadougou, the capital, had somehow found the Global Fund through a young French woman who was a volunteer, written to us, applied for a grant to buy an electric grain mill for their village. And there was much discussion at the Global Fund that, this is not really a women's rights project. They're wanting to buy a grain mill. I mean, what has this got to do with, advancing women's rights? I don't even think they knew the word women's rights. And yet when I arrived in that small village, two very significant things happened. One, all the men in the village were stunned that I was coming to meet the women in the village. We sat under a tree, and all the women sat under the tree, and the men sort of sat on the outskirts of the thing. And they said, we want you to understand why we wanted to get this electric grain mill. And to do that, you have to actually come and walk around our village with us. So we walked around the village, and in every home there's a mortar and pestle. And girls spend between 4 to 6 to 8 hours, girls and women, pounding millet into flour, which is then made into the food that they eat. And essentially, they were saying there is a girls' school. It's not very far from here. There's a school for our girls that the government has provided. But none of our girls have been able to go to that school. They haven't been able to go to that school because they spend 6 to 8 hours collecting water, fuel, firewood, and pounding millet. If we have an electric grain mill, our girls can do what Hans's mother now had the time to do, which is read him the books. Our girls can go to school. And in that small story is, I think, some of what we are talking about in terms of it's not just an accident of thinking about, this notion of what we have of progress as something that is disconnected from some of the larger issues around development, or right now what has become very trendy, women are in. I don't know if you have noticed, but we are hot, so to speak. And actually even more than women, girls are in. And it is a very interesting moment of time, because if you look at what Hans was talking about in terms of the trajectory of development and what you see in terms of the shifts and movements, there are wonderful reasons for us to be all excited about the fact that people are getting it, that they're getting that, those trajectories that he showed, the correlation between education but there's also something a little worrying about it, which is that it's not a magic bullet. It isn't a magic bullet. Like, you can have education, and if you have no access to contraception, those numbers that Hans was showing, are increasing 4 billion over here, will continue to grow completely unsupported with any of the other things that happen. You can also have, and Hans mentioned that in his presentation, you can have increases in income, and you can have increases in education. And the actual situation of women in many other instances in terms of their equality in the society, or rather how the culture has shifted in that society, doesn't necessarily change. And I say this a lot too. So in the years when Maria was doing Acción, just like girls' education, I say girls' education today is the microcredit of the 90s. In the 90s, microcredit was the magic answer. We just give them a $50 loan, Kiva, or we didn't have Kiva in those days, we had Acción. And then, ta-da, magically, all sorts of things will happen. But I think what Hans is pointing out is that just as in the same way we learned that was not true of microcredit, in the same way we have to be careful that it is also not true of education by itself. You don't just infuse an empty glass of girl with education, and then, all the other cultural issues are done, and then suddenly she magically finds access to contraception and she uses it. Yes, it's a very significant part of what happens, but other pieces have to be there as well. And I think partially what has become very taboo in the world right now, and Hans actually mentioned it in our earlier conversation, is somehow the conversation about family planning, access to contraception, and yes, access to safe, legal abortion has become tantamount to saying a 4-letter word. And failure to do that, failure to be able to speak in clear and plain English about what this actually means and how countries like Afghanistan will stay at the very bottom of that graph without that access. It is not just that you can say, well, you can't help Afghanistan. It's 3.3 years of education for every male and 0.5 for a female. At the very bottom. But it is also that Afghanistan has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. It also is a fact that if you think abortions don't happen in Afghanistan, you're wrong. They happen, and they take lives. 50 million lives taken every year. 50 million illegal abortions happen every year, of which the outcome is large numbers of lives lost. So I think partially for me, my response to Hans's incredibly important and moving figures is that it's important for us to kind of dig out of the big picture figures. What does this mean for women and girls? What does it mean for trying to slow down the momentum if we know we are going to be, and we do know, it's not, as Hans says, we know it's going to be on his birthday, on his 100th birthday. It'll be in the summer, in the morning. We will be at 9 billion.
After breakfast.
But it is not just that we will be at 9 billion, but what is the world that we want to see at 9 billion? We can have a world in which women are free and equal, and girls and boys have equal opportunities to go to school, and in which women are not spending all their time gathering fuel and firewood. Or we can have a world in which we have 9 billion, in which the vast majority of that 9 billion is still living in circumstances and in conditions that not only make it a highly unstable world for the rest of the, so that 4 billion that you saw Hans's Legos on this side, what are we doing to make sure that we don't have sort of an unstable world in which just the sheer violence of the inequalities, not just the inequalities of income, but also the inequalities that this perpetuated gender inequality will manifest itself as. I think those are some of the things that, for me, Hans's presentation brought up.
Wonderful, thank you. Great, excellent, fabulous. I think we could probably spend all afternoon here having this conversation with these great folks. I'd like to open it up for questions from the group, and let me take the chair's prerogative to ask just a couple questions. And just to begin, Hans, you came on the scene like a breath of fresh air, and you have been, I think to your own acknowledgement, met with adoring audiences, standing room only, applause. People are laughing in the corridors of Massachusetts Avenue, and really hearing some of what you're saying. But I just wonder, from your own perspective, do you think people are hearing what you're saying when you do the bubble presentation? And do you think that they're taking different actions, policymakers? And to what extent have you seen the effects of your startling and wonderful presentations in terms of policymakers' actions?
The corporate sector does. This is what's shocking to a grey social democrat from Sweden. The corporate sector is more fact-based than government and civil society. The leading companies, be it Pfizer here in the United States, be it SKF, the Swedish ball bearing factory, they know that Asia is the future. And the Swedish ball bearing factory, a company, SKF, which is an international company, one of the leading for ball bearings in the world, they have 25% of sales in Asia today. In 10 years it will be 50%, and beyond that it will be an Asian company. It's about moving main office to Asia. R&D is already going. Mm-hmm. And they identified that the most crucial issue they have today is in human resources. It's to manage to recruit the best Asian engineers in India and China. That ball bearing company will succeed. Mm-hmm. It's so far from Naomi Klein's shoe workers making Nikes. Mm-hmm. It's so far away from, that's gone. That exists at the same time, but it's not the main issue. And what was interesting about it was the female head of human resources who spoke fluently Chinese, that they had. And she said that the most interesting thing in China is that nowhere in the world can you find engineers, female and male, that work so nicely together without gender conflict.
Interesting.
And the Sony Ericsson, the mobile telephone company of Ericsson, who merged with Sony and moved to China, they found out that they no longer need to have European heads of the R&D teams. They recruit young female engineer at the age of 30 after having worked for 5 years and have had their first and probably only child. They have lateral thinking, understand design and technology at the same time. This is what it's about. So this is what's happening in that place. This is this is the front of the emerging economy. Google Maps is all made in Hyderabad in India. All made in Hyderabad. Every time you use them, and they're from software engineers trained in India. Then we see this is the lower income countries. And when you live in this blue, you can't see the two here. This is a problem. You don't understand about it. You don't understand this. Some are sent to fight wars here. And I have to respect the United States. for its role. I think President Lula said a good thing. He said, now when we are coming to a more equal situation, God, we realize we also have to take responsibility. We just used to complain on the United States for doing wrong. And indeed, this country did a lot of wrong things and a lot of good things. But now when others raise to power, they also have to take the responsibility. But it's being more and more non-fact based, the discussion in this blue, what they should do over here. And may I be very frank and clear, because I respect your situation representing government. But the issue of rapes here has been over-exaggerated 100 times over. Rapes is ugly. They occur in war. They have occurred in a higher proportion in Congo. But today a woman in Congo has to be raped to get aid. It's out of proportion, the way we have been talking about rape in Congo. Instead of calculating how many children reach the age of 5 to 7 and need to go to school, and how many places in school are available, how many kids get vaccinated, is family planning available?
And Hans, this is not new, because we had a similar situation in the 90s around FGM. And I remember a woman in Ethiopia telling me, with a very straight face, when you are as concerned about the number of children who are dying because of lack of access to clean drinking water as you are about the girls who are mutilated, then we can begin to take your concerns a little bit more seriously. This is not to minimize it, but I think it's important to understand.
And you did measure, water stands out, as a long-term issue, but the steadiness is. What I like with Bill and Melinda Foundation, and this is painful for a Swedish taxpayer being proud of having the highest tax rates in the world, to admit that United States billionaires are more steady and more good. It's painful, but it's fact-based. That they have decided what they do, and then they'll keep on that, and they keep doing it over the years. That is very important.
Let me stop us and open for questions. And I think that Gwen has a microphone. This woman right here.
Hello, my name is Sue Casey, and I'm with the Microcredit Summit campaign. And I guess what I wanted to ask a little bit was to follow up on the issue that you raised about that one hot issue, girls' education, microcredit, is not the only solution, that these things don't work in isolation. And we've been working on some pilot projects to link health education with microcredit, and we find both better health outcomes and better economic outcomes. So I was wondering, if the panel could discuss projects that
I think
do
it
more
might
than
be a
one
good
thing.
idea for us to take a couple of
few,
questions.
yeah, that's
and
a
then
good
so
idea.
Since we're running over a little bit, and there's a lot of great, and this gentleman right here has his hand up, and then the one
Thanks.
in the back.
Very quickly, Carl Hoffman from Population Services International, PSI. First, Professor Rosling, you're obviously a very gifted teacher, and we thank you for that. I just add my words to everything that's already been said. Among the many responsibilities that Undersecretary Otero has is to help Secretary Clinton and the leadership of the administration decide how to allocate the United States restricted assistance spending. What would you say is the best use of those resources in order to raise the trajectory of the Congo, for example? What should the United States be doing with less aid dollars than it would like to spend in the years ahead?
Good.
Great
And
question.
Tom, you have your hand up, and then, forgive me, I think there was someone over on this side as well. Okay, Tom, go ahead.
Tom Merrick, PRB. I have a question for Hans Rosling, which is whether you and your team have been able to take those big bubbles for China and India and break them up into little bubbles for the states and provinces. And if you have, what kind of ahas or interesting surprises have come out of that exercise?
Good. Good. Let me just take one more
There's a
question.
young
The
woman
person
there.
over here on the left, yeah. If you want to just say your name and
Sure. Hi, Maureen Greenwood-Baskin with the UN Foundation. Professor Rosling, your presentation was very interesting. I realize I take Kavita's point that everything needs to be holistic and all these need to move forward, but I'm interested in correlation versus causality. What's an input factor and what's an output factor? Is it access to family planning? Is it access to education? Is it immunizations? Is it economic opportunity? What causes what? It's similar to the question of where do you invest?
It's a simple question.
good. All right, I'm going to stop there and let the panel jump in to some of the questions. There was a series of questions. Maria, would you like to begin with the question about the
Microcredit, and then I
administration?
can, or on the administration.
Yeah, this question, I worked in microfinance for more than 20 years. since I was 12. Weren't we about
Yeah,
that age
yeah.
when we started? But
Definitely 12.
there is no question that anyone who is looking for a silver bullet is fast asleep. I mean, and they're really just not seeing the complexity. If there's anything that we can pull out from the presentation that we just heard, is the very complex world that we live in, and the factors that contribute. Before we worried about, well, what are the root causes of poverty, for example? And those discussions, of course, emerged with thoughts about what inputs you needed to be able to put forth in order to be able to lift people out of poverty. Along comes China, and in a decade lifts 300 million people out of poverty. So, the very important discussion, and since we all work in sectoral issues, just the fact that we are here is because we are interested in reproductive health and in population issues, we tend to not think about the input of the other areas. And certainly my experience is that there is absolutely no silver bullet, that microfinance never was a silver bullet, and neither is looking at young girls or any one issue. I think that's really important to just point out. How it is that we can address, though, some of the problems as conflict continues to increase around the world. And I do want to make this point because that's one of the factors that is also very different since we brought down the Berlin Wall, is that right now we have probably in 50 parts of the world conflict that is either at very serious level or really sparking up. And that's the reason I bring up gender-based violence, because it's become a weapon of war, and it will only grow and increase over time if we're not able to address it through the way in which we deal with security. We can have more of that discussion later. But the point is that the many factors that are playing into the way in which countries are evolving, are developing, or are remaining stuck are ones that require us to be able to really think very carefully about the way we address it.
Yeah.
I mean, I could say a lot more about this, but I
Good,
think
thanks.
it's
So I think there's a question on correlations between the two. Do you want to address that, and then?
and how we can use our money.
Bidirectional causalities are very difficult to address in science when you don't even can make experiments.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
But often it is that you get the political reason for liking the one direction of the causality and not the other one. Try to find out, why do we have a lesbian bishop in the Church of Sweden in Stockholm that live in a same-sex marriage with a 3-year-old son? Very difficult to find the causality of that. We are surprised and we are proud. Why does the Christian right in Sweden not oppose abortion? Things are very special in different countries, and things can happen and they cannot happen. On national, it's very difficult to talk about causalities, what they can do. Why was the United States the main funder of family planning in the world in the 1960s, starting the beautiful World Fertility Study? Thank you very much. And for the continuation demographic health survey that you have been funding continuously through the administration. That's why I have the babbles. Thank you very much for that. High quality US government and enterprise. It's not academic institution. It's Westinghouse who took the first contract. And then it's skilled people. It's US at its best. That's why we have demographic health service and free data on the internet. That's what we have. But why did US start this? Because it was the domino theory, and family planning was a way to stop communism in Asia.
In Asia.
Al Gore tells me that now it's the same political group that opposed the very same form of aid that they were running at that time.
Yeah.
So you see how countries change. It's not the world that has problem talking about abortion and family planning. It's the United States of America.
Well, that's what I
that has
meant.
that
This
problem.
world.
You have difficulty with this part.
It's true.
And it can. We have difficulty.
Or you think everything can be solved with this part.
Or Sweden had a difficulty with microfinance. We were slow in accepting that it was and remain a very important component of development. Indeed, it will. But it's not the only one. It needs all. Educated women with microcredits is much better than women who are not educated with microcredits. So this is it. That's with microcredit and the bi-direction. But I mean, you just need. I mean, you use family planning, for God's sake, everyone, so the other ones also like it. You have to fix it one way or the other, you know. So we need that in the world. And the interesting thing is that the Islamic Republic of Iran has legal free abortion, and Ireland has not.
But that's because they're a godless country. Oh no, they
No,
have a
no,
different
no.
God.
But I mean, it's very interesting to see how things change. The China split, you go to gapminder.org and you go to labs and you find China's provinces and India's states. We have done them, and what you find is that in China you have an urban-rural difference, which is very big. In India you have a socioeconomic difference, which is very big. And you have the rural parts of Guizhou is like average on Pakistan. So that's the worst in China. But it's better to live in a rural area of a poor province in China than to live in a neighboring country. Because in China you have electricity. Mao provided electricity.
And education for all everyone.
Education, yeah. I mean, that's a basic. So these are not things you shouldn't discuss whether people should have access to family planning, to vaccination, to school. These are basics, you know. You need them all, and you get them done. The difficult question here was Congo. It humbles. It humbles. You know, you can have a simplistic. It's really difficult. And I have done research in Congo over many years, and I followed it. What Congo needs, you know, is stability. And maybe if you read The Bottom Billion of Paul Collier, stability may not be achieved by public spending or not by election. Election cause civil war more than solve them.
As we saw in Iraq.
So pragmatic interventions which understand what's done. Sometimes armed intervention, United Nations, are needed, but they're very difficult to do. And Afghanistan, I wouldn't advise. I'm just humble on what to do. But try to get school working, try to get education working, but most of all provide some sort of work for young adult men which otherwise would go to the armed group. I think of that. Investment in infrastructure, building those schools. But we just have to learn it, and the problem is we cannot find out, and we are Iran and United States, which both have problem with Afghanistan. Iran and it's either Iran or United States that have to handle the violence and the instability in Iran. So what should they do? And this is a new situation. It's not the Vietnam War. It's not any conflict we've had before. And I would agree with you that we have conflicts of a new character. The size of the deaths are not bigger. It was worse in the Cold War. It's good that the Cold War is over. But the type of conflicts we have today is something new. And United States have tried to address them with economic and human sufferings. And this. And I just have to respect that. And I'm not so critical because I can't tell a better way of doing it. I'm defending the way Sweden is doing it. But of course it's not enough because the good side is not winning. The good side is not winning. Somalia is as it is, you know. But we don't finding out to do that evidence-based. That was a joke of that PowerPoint about Afghanistan. I think it was quite true, that PowerPoint, you know, with all the relations in it.
And Hans, maybe the point you made earlier in our conversation today is also relevant to this, which is we were talking about Ethiopia, and you know we were talking about the dilemma between, which I think sometimes plays out a lot in for those of us who care about population, is that you get caught between the rights activists on the one hand, and you know, so everything, or the green, and sometimes the green and the rights people on the same side, and that whole thing is about like, oh, it will all happen naturally, you know, you give everybody their rights, and then also don't intervene too much, and it will happen by itself. Well, we know from much too much experience that is not the case, and I think you made a very interesting point about Ethiopia making the kinds of leaps in terms of its development strategy, while on the other hand, by human rights, by any human rights criteria, it is terrible. And China, of course, is another, you know, big example of that. But I think that's an important thing to put on the table, because I think some of us don't want to face the fact that sometimes that whole notion of stability before rights may in fact be something.
Let me tell a story, just a story. My grandma, maternal grandma, was a hero. She had a husband that was an alcoholic, a bad man. And she had 3 children. And she wanted family planning. She didn't want any more family. She had heard about this man who was going to talk about something called condom. So she walked down to the square in Uppsala, the university city, and saw him standing up on a box, dragging out the condom and being arrested within 2 seconds. Because in the late 1920s, you were not allowed to show condoms in Sweden. He was the leader of the Communist Party. How embarrassing that it was the leader of the Communist Party. Grandma was not a communist. So he was arrested. The ban of condom existed in Sweden from 1909 to 1936. It was banned to have it. When I was in the student union, the international section, I participated in handling the secret fund to fund abortion trips to Catholic Communist Poland. That was 1969. Things change. Things change. They will change in this country also. You have to address the entire body. You can't cut out the piece, like in those children's book where you have different slides of the body. Yeah? And they can change. And then we end up having a lesbian bishop, to our great surprise and pride. So they can change, and it's unpredictable when they change. There are different forces, and you find different solutions of handling them. We have also many countries that have illegal safe abortions, and we have countries that have legal unsafe abortions. But abortion is 50 million in the world. It's a big thing, and you have to handle it. All countries have to choose one way or the other to handle it. But abortion is not so important in family planning. It's more the get out of mortality, to get education, to get some sort of rights, and then get access to the stuff. Because people won't stop having sex. They won't stop having sex.
Don't you have the Say No, Just Say No program in your country?
Just say no, it won't happen.
It is interesting that you can see that the countries, we have such strong connection with the United States. We reconnected with our relatives. That's why my mother did genealogy, and 150 years after we reconnected, my folk came over with the most fanatic Christian group who built Bishop Hill on the prairie. These sort of fanatic, they had almost public intercourses, and women and men living. It was worse than Parliament. But then they integrated the same, and we reconnected, and we had so many different views. It's interesting, And we came back to the same place, and they have completely. This NRI cap is no good in Sweden. Take it off your national rifle.
That's right. It won't work.
No, they won't work in Sweden. So we had very different values, but yet we were relatives. And we became friends and close to each other. So the course of countries goes like this, and it keeps changing. Great. And that's argument. But the basic investment is another thing. The Hoover Dam was good. And Dilma in Brazil is going to build a dam. And Cameron ain't going to stop her. Because people ain't blue in Brazil. They are human beings and they want electricity. But the rights of the Indian people in that valley has to be defended. But you can't stop the dam from being built. But there must be a decent future for the people who live there. Good. And it's this attitude we have to have in the world. So the rights issues are there.
Okay, so as you can see, this first of the 7 billion series, these are going to be holistic conversations. They're going to be surprising conversations. We've talked a lot about sex. I think that will, keep the series going for a while. And I do really want to say that.
A final comment: go to Google on the internet and search "sex, money, and health." You get 90 million hits, and see who's on top.
Right. All right. So let me just.
We're gonna make them dance.
I told you were going to get a performance.
So let me just take a moment to say that each in their own ways,
you love it.
Hans, Maria, Kavita, we're all deeply, deeply grateful for the work that you do, each in your own spheres, and we're looking to you to lead us into these new conversations. And I really thank everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next series, and thank you very much.